Hi, my name is Crystal Balint. I play Dolly Scarborough in Netflix's Midnight Mass, and you're watching Pop Culture with Pat.
Open your minds.
This could be the end of everything.
Open your hearts.
I want you to run.
Hey guys, welcome back to Pop Culture with Pat. So today we are headed to Crockett for a little mass with Crystal Balint, and she plays Dolly on the show Midnight Mass, which is currently streaming on Netflix right now. Thank you so much, Crystal, for coming on the show today and doing this.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So to kind of, start things off right from the beginning, with the show, how did the role of Dolly, come about for you on Midnight Mass?
Sure. Well, I was asked to audition for the role back at the end of 2019, and it was so pre-pandemic, but I was asked to submit what's called a self-tape down to the casting down in LA. And it was right before the holidays, so I was busy, and at the time I had very small children, and I was rushing about, of course, and thought, okay, well, I'll just quickly bang it off with my partner, who's also an actor. And I didn't really look at the details too specifically about the production, but my character description was a sentence long. I think it said that she is the mother of Lisa. She's a Crockett Island local. It was very vague. And at the time it was a working title for the project. So I didn't really even clock any of that. I just sent it off and then jumped into the holidays and enjoyed myself like you do. And then about 2 weeks into the new year, I got a call from my agent saying, "Oh, you've booked this job with Mike Flanagan." And I was like, I don't remember. I literally had like very little recollection of the tape itself, because it had been like almost a month since I'd sent it, and so much had happened since then. And so I looked up Mike, and at the time I had not seen Hill House, because I'm myself not a huge horror fan. I'm just too much of a scaredy cat to enjoy it. So we immediately sought out Hill House. I was familiar with Hill House, but I just hadn't seen it yet. So my partner and I immediately started watching it and binging it. And I was like, my jaw was on the floor. I was so impressed with Hill House, like so many other people were. And I then could not believe my lucky stars that I was going to get to not only work with some of the actors who were going to be in Hill House, because at that time I knew some of the other cast, and so I get to work with these tremendous actors, but also, of course, getting to work with Mike, who is just this incredible guy and an incredible filmmaker. And so I was really, really, really thrilled at that point. And then, of course, I got the scripts, and the scripts just like blew my mind. And I was a huge fan.
Yeah, no, that's one of the crazy things too with Mike, is that, you saying that you're not like yourself, like a big like horror fan. That's one of the cool things with a lot of his projects. Like, even though he does like a lot of stuff like in horror, I feel like people that aren't necessarily big horror fans can go into these shows, and there's still really good stories, great characters in there. So even if you're not like a big horror fan, you can still just like appreciate it for like the story and for like the characters like themselves, because there's also a lot of times like a drama kind of like built into there like as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I most appreciated about it was, and that we were both really blown away when we watched it, was because when I thought, horror show, I thought, okay, I'll like tough it through. I know it's a popular one, but it's gonna probably scare the pants off me. And like, make no mistake, I, to this day, still have nightmares about Ben Neck Lady. Like, I cannot look into a closet without seeing her. So it still scared the pants off me, but I couldn't look away, because the drama of it was so rich, and the performers were so terrific. I couldn't look away from the actors, So I had to see through that. I could handle the odd jump scare or the odd scary thing, because I was just so drawn into that drama. And that's when I had my first meeting with Mike and Trevor Macy, his producing partner at Intrepid. That was what we talked about, was I was trying to sort of, singing my praises of Hill House. And they said, well, that's what we are endeavoring to do. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but they basically said, we want to make good shows that happen to be scary. And I was like, well, that's just brilliant. I mean, of course you do, because you guys make good shows. So why not, and Midnight Mass is no exception. Blind Manor is terrific as well. So, and I feel confidently that the things that he just likes to do is just to tell good stories. And if people get scared, that's also a bonus.
Yeah, no. And one of the things, I wanted to ask you about too, just because, I feel like it's like an interesting, dynamic. So in the show, you play the mother to like Lisa, and you're a mother in real life as well. So, and in the show, obviously, your family is hit by this tragedy with what happened like to your daughter earlier on, like before we actually like see the characters. Can you just talk about the dynamic for you playing this character of Dolly and like being like a mother, yourself?
Hmm. I think one of the things what I tried to imbue Dolly with was that she, aside from the fact that she's just incredibly sad when we meet her, when we first find her on the island, is that her driving, like her modus operandi is love, right? She has a tremendous amount of love for her family, namely her daughter. She has a tremendous amount of love for her community. Crockett is her place of origin. It's where she's always been, and the people there she loves. And both of those things that she loves more than anything have been really devastatingly wounded over the last several years. From when we, 6 years, say, prior to when we meet Dolly. And really irreparably changed, like not just like having a bad slump. I mean, her community is on a significant decline.
Yeah.
People are not coming back to Crockett. Her daughter is paralyzed from the waist down. That is not something that you can repair. So it's very difficult for her. But she really just loves, and she's faithful. She really believes. She is, and so when we meet her, she's really trying hard to make sense of it and to kind of reconcile where things are. And she's not super successful when we meet her, but yeah, that's sort of Dolly is, for me. Dolly is a representation of love. And where Dolly gets into trouble, of course, later on, is that how you are blinded by that desire to see your loved ones or the people around you be okay.
Yeah, and real quick, I realized before, because we're definitely gonna get into some spoilers here. So I just as like you were wrapping up that question, I was like, you know what? Before we go any further, guys, for you, you guys watching afterwards, this is definitely going to have spoilers in it. So if you have not seen the show, make sure you watch the show, come back and watch the rest of this like afterwards, because we're gonna talk some spoilers. But yeah, because what happens like later on with Dolly, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
The show Midnight Mass, it's about this small community of Crockett. It's very tight knit, and Mike Flanagan, he's known for working with a lot of the same people on multiple different projects. You kind of talked a little bit about like working with Mike, but can you just talk about that sense of community as far as like the set and just like the cast goes for this project?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, what was really kind of overwhelming, I found, on this project was there was a sort of a perfect storm of things that created this really significant bond, I think, for all of us attached to the project, kind of chiefly the cast, but even off screen, like, the crew that we were all working with. It was, we were coming into this thing after a pandemic had been, and we'd all been in lockdown, and many of us had been very, stripped from our social circles. And, there's a lot of fear and dread and anxiety. And then we come back to this place where suddenly we have to go do this thing, this acting thing that we all do. And we're nervous. And some of us are, I was fortunate to be able to we shot it here in Vancouver. So I was obviously close to home, and I get to come home and sleep in my own bed every night and see my kids and spend time with my partner. But some people were here on their own without their families, and they were, in another country, and unable to go back and forth because of the border closure. And some people brought their families, so their whole families were up here away from their extended families. So there's a whole myriad of reasons why it was just sort of a unique set of circumstances for us to all be in this place at this time. But I think what it ultimately did, and we talked about a little bit, the cast and I, all of us sort of, or a number of us after we wrapped, was that what I think it actually created was, pardon me, this really unique bond and really unique connection to one another in a way that was just transcended sort of previous projects that we had worked on, because we were all in this sticky, gooey mud of emotional sort of chaos together. And no, the thing about the pandemic and us coming back after the pandemic, because we were one of the first projects back up, but for all of us, it was whether or not we were the first, for all of us, it was the first project that we'd all come back to after being in lockdown in this new world. So it was a great equalizer.
Yeah.
No one could say, oh, I've been through this before, or last pandemic, we did it this way, or, oh, don't worry, you'll get used to it, because none of us had done it. Like day one, we were all in the same boat. So we kind of like clung to one another in a way, because we were all scared, and none of us really knew all the things, and we were all making mistakes. Oh, don't forget to put your mask on, or don't forget to, you got to clean your hands after, or whatever, like whatever those things were. And then at the same time, we were all having to really look out for one another in a really significant way, because when we went home, we couldn't just go and like do our thing and take risks. We had to know that we had to trust that the people that we were in close contact with were going to go home and do the right thing. Yeah. So it created almost like this sense of family. And there's other things that we went through. A cast member had a baby while we were, while we were shooting, and we went through like the US election, the 2020 election together. And these were all things that just continue to make us feel more and more like a community. And so I think what you feel on camera or in the final project, what you feel is like what feels like a tangible sense of community, because it really did feel like a sense of community.
Yeah.
And many of us have stayed in very close contact. There's email strings and text strings that go on for days. And I'm really grateful for that, because I feel like these people are like good friends of mine now. We went through a sort of a storm together, and came out the other side smelling like roses. So it was really something unique and special.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine there's nothing like, a pandemic, I guess, to bond people, like you said, like coming back, and it's a whole new world, first experiences for a lot of, for everybody. So yeah, I can imagine that would definitely bond you guys together. And I can, at least for myself, watching the show as like a fan, that sense of community, it really came off like from you could feel like this was like an actual like, community of like 100 plus people or whatever. So that definitely came across like on screen.
Mm-hmm. And even the extras, like we had like the same background, because we had to create this community. I mean, for the most part, there a lot of the background were from with us. Any of those background scenes where we had people in church or in the community, many of them were with us like through that whole shooting period. So they were almost like parts of the cast. Like we see the same background all the time, and we had to trust that the background were taking care of themselves so that we could all be safe. And so, yeah, it was something really unique.
A lot of moving parts for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and one of my, favorite things about, as far as like, Mike Flanagan goes, is that he creates such, compelling and oftentimes, complicated characters. As an actor, obviously that must be like really rewarding. What was it like, working with him, and what for you personally in the show, what moment or scene for you as Dolly like stands out the most to you?
So I'll start with the first part of your question. Working with Mike was it was a dream. He's such a wonderful creator, and he's a really thoughtful director, thoughtful producer, thoughtful creator, but also just like a really thoughtful guy. Like just in general, he's just a really like an easygoing, and I don't say easygoing like, oh, he's like laissez-faire. He knows, he keeps a tight ship. He makes sure that things are, and so does Trevor. Him combined with Trevor Macy, they're just like a powerhouse. They run a very tight ship, but it's in a very easygoing, quasi-family style way. You know what I mean? You can go to him with something and he will, you can email him, you can reach out to him and he will pick up the phone, so that was really compelling for me, because you do sometimes work, as an actor, you sometimes work on projects for months and you only talk to the director on set for very limited amounts of time, or you don't get to, you don't have a back and forth. But again, this pandemic created this space where when we shut down, both of them were like, we're here if you need anything, and I was like, that's crazy, because like you guys have other things to do than worry about whatever I'm dealing with. So it was he really blew my mind as far as what it is to be the captain of a ship, so to speak. And how you can do that in an effective way and a productive way, but not have it be isolating and not have it be like a hierarchy. That's something new for me. And I just so appreciated that, because what it does is it just immediately puts you at ease as a person so that you can then come in and do your best work. And that's just like such a gift. So but for me, sorry, the second part of your question was about Dolly. Yes.
Oh yeah, just as far as for you, if there's like one, scene or moment in the show for you that stands out the most.
Yeah. Well, so I have, I mean, there's so many things that stand out because so much of it was so much fun, but the twos, I have two, it's a sort of a two-parter,
That's
two
fine.
parts that sort of really affected me as Crystal, but also as Dolly, was of course when Lisa gets up out of her wheelchair. And that was just so much fun to do, because it was like for me, I'd spent a lot of time sort of working in Dolly's body and what a lot of grief and stress and anxiety can do to someone's physicality. So it was a great sort of release for Dolly in that moment, because that her getting up and walking is kind of literally like everything she's been putting her energy towards for the last several years. It's a dream come true. It's too good to be true, but it's just like, it's like someone holding their breath for years and then finally being able to exhale. So that was a lot of fun to do just as an actor, to be able to invest in that kind of energy. But for sure, I think probably my favorite sequence to film was the second half of episode 6. So the church, from basically the procession to the church, the candlelit procession, and then the whole, and it's, I think people don't always know this, but the second half of that episode is like a 25-page long scene that we shot over about 5 days. Like it's all one scene. And it was in a monster to sort of, it was like, 5 12-hour days shooting this immense scene. And it was a huge undertaking. We had incredible stunt people who were helping us with it, but it was just a beautiful thing to be a part of as an actor, because there were so many moving parts, and all of us were there. The whole cast was there for the most part, with the exception of a couple of people. And it was all candlelit. The light you see there is actual tangible light. There's no other lights. It's just candles. So it was kind of like this wonderful place to play. And again, just with Mike at the helm and our incredible DP and Michael Famiari, and we just had a great crew who just took good care of us, and we just got to go and like throw people around and like have a lot of fun,
Yeah, and I'm actually going to ask you a little bit more about that, and a couple more like questions, but I wanted to first. I have to say, as far as, so that we'll talk about a little bit more on that in a second, but as far as like the first scene that you brought up, the moment with you and Lisa, that's when I knew that I was super invested in the show and the characters, because that moment got me choked up, and like I was like almost like crying, because you see like your reaction, and you just see the reaction on like Lisa's like face, like being able to walk. And I was just like, well, this show definitely has me, like, just like thinking about it now, it's like, wow. So, I mean, that was one of my like, personal, like standout moments for you, like as well. So great job, all you guys, like, as far as like,
thank you.
You're welcome. Now, curious. So, I'm a big Stephen King fan, and I know that Mike obviously is a big Stephen King fan himself. So for myself, like watching this early on, I got a lot of, more so early on, was Storm of the Century. I got a lot of vibes from that, because that kind of, I mean, a lot of his stories take place in like small communities and things like that. Then later on in the series, definitely got the Salem's Lot, vibes to it, like as well. So even though vampires are never mentioned in the show, which I thought was a really cool, decision to do. Yeah. What kind of preparation did you do personally for your character? And did Mike suggest you like read anything or watch anything for, like the show and the character?
It's interesting that you say Storm of the Century and Salem's Lot, because Mike, I actually watched an interview with Mike and Trevor several weeks ago that they'd done, and he alluded to those same two works of Stephen King's as sort of like, I guess it probably influence some of the tone or the feel. So that's bang on there. I'm not familiar with either of those, unfortunately. Like I said, I'm a total horror wuss, so I kind of avoid it. But I know Stephen King's work, and I have seen some of his works, and people are constantly urging me to read the books because the books are terrific. In fact, my partner worked on The Stand last year, and so I'm staring at a huge thick copy of The Stand, which I have been told a number of times to read. But anyways, that aside, he didn't recommend those two works or anything like that for me to watch. But when we had our first meeting about the show and about the character, he had asked me to take a look at the Jonestown stuff, the stuff surrounding the awful, horrible event that had occurred in Jonestown, specifically for Dolly, because of the role that I play in that final sort of terrible, those scenes in episode 6. Yep. And so that's what I did. I went back and looked at, I listened to a podcast about it, and then just kind of learning a little bit more about Jim Jones, but I also listened to what they call the death tapes, which are, if you've had a chance to listen to them, are really just sort of bone chilling, because what the biggest thing I took away from those is that even as the whole thing was just eroding into a scary, deadly massacre, you can hear, amidst all the garbled sort of music and Jim Jones's sort of chanting and talking, you can hear the voices of people, and it is a lot of women sort of chanting things like "believe" or "we're with you" or "he is with you." And I found that really compelling, because especially knowing the context of the script, and again, Dolly's role in that particular adventure, shall we say, I found that really compelling, because it just spoke to how deep these people really believed in what they were doing. And even when it was at the, watching people die in front of them, women and children and people and men and everyone in the community, they still really firmly affirmed the idea that they were doing the right thing, that they were behaving in the way that their Lord was expecting them to believe, or the person that they believed. And that's really fascinating, right? Because these people were, you can say they were lost, but they were all people who at some point probably had lives and families, and were free thinking individuals with educations.
Yeah.
So that's what I took away from that. And I tried to apply that mentality if I could, which is just challenging to do, but to Dolly, which is just that you hold fast to what you believe in, come hell or high water. And that's what Dolly does, is she sees only the good of what this thing has done. She doesn't see the bad until it's too late. And that was the thing I tried to spend a little bit of time with as well.
That's definitely fascinating. And kind of playing off that, two characters that I want to talk to you about, like with the show, which you got screen time, with both of them. I'm sure you probably have an idea of who it's going to be, but Father Paul and then Bev Keane. Obviously great performances, by both of the actors there. And you interact with them, like quite a bit. So we find out by the end of the show that Father Paul, he maybe had good intentions like somewhere in there, but just kind of went about things the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And then we find out that Bev was pretty much just evil from like the get-go. So what was it like just, working with both of them?
Well, I mean, first off, they're absolutely incredible actors, both of them, at what I perceive to be the top of their game right now. I mean, Hamish is a force. Watching him do those homilies and those scenes at the table read in March, at the before we had 5 extra months with the material, was giving everybody goosebumps, and so he is an incredible actor. Like, it's in spending time around him, watching doing those homilies. I mean, if you watch us in the audience, if they catch, there's scenes where he's doing a speech and they cut away to those of us in the audience and in church.
Yep.
We're not acting. Like, we don't have to act that we're looking at him with awe and wonder. It really is like there were times where I would have to go, oh yeah, I have to be Dolly right now, because you're just so drawn into, it's so compelling what he's doing and the choices that he makes. And they're not easy things that he's doing to make that type of dialogue roll off the tongue and sound natural. He's in a class of his own. It's really something else. And you know, Sam is the same. Sam is like, I got to witness a lot of those scenes just firsthand, seeing her do something similar with very chunky dialogue. A lot of it is very religious laden, and you know, she's playing this zealot who is really quite funny actually at times, and I got to see some of that. And when I saw it in its final form, Sam was the person who, to no surprise, just stood out to me so much, because there's so many scenes where she's so still and she's so grounded and she's so powerful. And I really believe who Bev is. Like, I believe that Sam is Bev in those moments, like 100%. And what's amazing about that, and why it's so terrific that Sam is that person, is that she's so the opposite. She's just like this incredibly kind and gentle and warm and thoughtful and just easygoing, easy to be around person. And we've become friends. And so that's what's so stunning about her performance as Bev, is because there's no part of her that is anything like Bev, from at least that I've ever seen. So it's like a complete 180 from who she is. And that's the mark of an incredible actor. But yeah, I got to spend a lot of time with them, and it was just such a treat. It was like going to acting school, like watching those two performers work, and then watching the scenes with them together. And yeah, it's like so impactful and so powerful.
They were both forces for sure. And like, I could see that, like, if I was sitting there, you know, in the audience and watching him deliver those, you know, those speeches and stuff like that, just like so much, like, especially like him, so much dialogue. And it was a very, like, the show overall was a very dialogue heavy show, which I really appreciated. um I just, like, you can't even imagine the amount of work to put into, you know, filming those scenes, preparing for those scenes with those long, you know, periods of dialogue. But Bev too, like you said, I was gonna say, that's the mark of like a great actress, you know, uh being able to portray like this character where you're nothing, absolutely nothing like this character, but then this character is like just completely like evil.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like she's so in it, like she's so evil the whole time. But what's great about it, I saw this, I think it might have been the same interview that I'd seen with Mike, and he'd said, you know, the real monster in Midnight Mass is Bev. Like, everything else pales in comparison to the journey that Bev goes on as like a really awful person who just is driven by her own, you know, her own desire for power, or her own desire for righteousness, you know. And so that's what's so scary about the show, I think, is like the people like Bev who move through the world like that, just manipulating things to their own benefit, using religion or using faith, or, you know, it's like she's like the Jim Jones of the show. You
Yeah,
know.
I was actually, that was one of the things I was going to ask you. So I'll just, as it kind of ties in, so I kind of got your answer there. But I was going to say, Midnight Mass, it has both, because it definitely has like supernatural like scares and stuff like that, as well as
Yeah.
like the human element to it. But it sounds like, and that's probably where I would go to, which one's scarier to you, the supernatural or the human? And I would probably say the human for me, just because it's like, there's people like we've had in history, there's people out there that really are like this, and this could actually happen, where, I mean, you never know, maybe there are like vampires out there like somewhere or whatever.
Mhm.
But this stuff can like actually happen. So is that kind of the same case like for you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's that's the thing. I think that's why Bev, her character has connected, Sam's character of Bev is so connected to people, and people connected in a way that people just hate her. Like, again, like, if you look at social media, people are like, like, I'll post a picture of her, of Sam, and they're like, I hate her. And I'm like, no, please take a breath. Okay. Cause she's fantastic, but she's so good that's why you hate Bev. And, I think it speaks to this thing that we all know, either it's in ourselves, which is dangerous, obviously. And, you know, if you can call attention to it, you can point, if you can name it, then good for you. But I think there's part of that in ourselves where we believe we're right. We just believe we're right. Then there's, or you've seen it in your life. You've dealt with someone like that at work, or you've dealt with someone in your family like that, or you've dealt with someone, at school or whomever. You've come across someone who is just like dangerous, just really dangerous as far as how they view the world and how they treat people in that world. And yeah, so I would say for sure that the people who are like that, the Bev Keanes of the world, call them the Karens of the world to some extent, that those are the people that I think are more scary than demons and angels and, vampires and ghosts and what have you, because they affect real things in the life that we're living now, and yeah, I think that's sort of the journey that Mike takes us on, is like, ultimately, that's what is scary, is how people digest this stuff and how people maneuver themselves in these things like faith, like religion, like, all of those, those things that get scandalized. And that's not the problem, it's the people.
Yeah. And so when I first heard about the show, because actually I've had Alex Esso, I've had her
great.
Before. So I had actually known, because last time I had her on, we were talking about her work on Dr. Sleep and Blight Manor had it. So yeah, it was just Dr. Sleep. But she was saying she just, mentioned she was in the show. Obviously couldn't go, too far into details at that point. So when I first saw the trailer and stuff, I kind of had, this picture of what I thought the show was going to be about going into it. And then obviously we get to a certain point in the show and the thing just completely flips it on its head. For you, what was your reaction, whether it was reading the script or just getting to that point in shooting? What was your reaction when you found out what was kind of going on in Midnight Mass?
I like many people, I did not see it coming. I remember I can sort of vaguely remember turning the page in my script or on my iPad, whatever it was, and going, wait a minute, what? And having to go back and read 2 or 3 pages back, and just to lead up to it again, so I can make sure that I actually read that properly. And yeah, it kind of blew my mind. And I didn't tell my partner, is also an actor, and so he was, quite oftentimes if I'm not working on something, or if he's working on something, we run lines together, or we read this part and tell me, read the script or whatever. But when I got to that part, I was like, oh, I shouldn't tell him what this is about. And I remember having a kind of a loud, sitting on the couch reading the script and having sort of a vocal response to it, oh my God, or something like that. And him saying, what? I'm like, never mind. I think I said something like, this is I just went a place that I never thought it was going to go. So I deliberately kept him out of the loop, even through shooting, and didn't show any pictures that I'd taken on set, anything like that, just so that he could experience that for the first time as a viewer, with fresh eyes. Yeah, but I didn't see it coming. And I was, at first, I have to say, I was a little bit, I was blindsided, and I'm not sure if it was a good thing, because I sort of went oh, really? Oh, that's an interesting thing. But then when I went back and reread those episodes, and I saw how he sort of wove it in to things, and I also clocked the fact that the word vampire is never used, then I was sort of just turned on by the whole thing. I was like, oh, okay, I can get behind this, because this is really unique. This is a really unique way to apply this particular filter to this story, And then I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to ruffle so many feathers, but it didn't. I mean, maybe it has, but I thought that's a really fascinating way to sort of look at those two things and sort of make them one,
Yeah, I love that they always refer to it as an angel. It has the wings and everything, and I was like, that's very clever. So I mean, just the writing overall, obviously fantastic writing, just the way that they were able to kind of tackle that subject. But it definitely, if you ever want to, or get the chance to, definitely read Salem's Lot, because there is some similarities, because basically that's about a small town where this guy, a writer, comes back to the town that he grew up in, and there's this creepy old house there. A vampire ends up moving into the house and starts turning the small community into vampires. So it definitely has the influences, for sure. So I think it was like I read it when I was like pretty young. I was like a teenager or whatever, and it scared the crap out of me. So it is fairly scary, but if you get a chance, definitely, check it out for sure.
Yikes. Okay, cool. I will.
As far as, because I wanted to talk to you about the church, the massacre scene, because
Mhm.
obviously, you hinted to it. It was a pretty like big deal. Could you just talk a little bit about, so it's like the filming of that scene? Because like obviously a lot of moving parts there, and you said you guys were filming for a couple days. So just like what went into that?
Yeah. So what was really lovely about the way that we shot the show was that we didn't shoot it like episode 1, then episode 2, then episode 3, as you often do, or sometimes you do in 2-episode blocks. We shot the entire seven episodes in what they call a block shoot. So it was sort of more like a feature film. So it was kind of more like location based filming. And that was really kind of, it can be kind of confusing because you're all moving all over your storyline over the course of the 4 months we were shooting. But what was really great about it, the gift that gave us, is that it meant that all of the interior church scenes were all shot at the very end of the show, and like in the last basically 3 weeks of shooting, and they shot those in sequence. So much of the show happens in church, and for many of us characters, a lot of our journey occurs through some of those, it's like marked by those church scenes. And so what was great about that is it gave us an opportunity as a cast to kind of like go back and sort of mark those pivotal points as characters from episode 1 straight through to episode 7. So when we got to that sequence in episode 6, I think we shot it, I think, over 5 days or something like that. And we had this whole big map there. I have a picture of it. It's a big map of like 12 days of church or something. And so it was like all the scenes and what order they went in and what we needed for those days and who was in them. And it was a big board that they printed out outside of the church scene, or a set in the studio. But that sequence took 5 days to shoot, roughly 12, like 4.5 12-hour days, basically, with a number of background. And again, remember, this is during the pandemic. So we had a packed church with a bunch of background and a bunch of actors and a bunch of stunt people, plus crew, and what have you, all jammed into this little church scene, church set. So there was a significant amount of testing going on, and we all went, again, they took really good care of us to make sure everybody was safe and sound. But they just broke it down into tiny little chunks. We shot a little bit of, it's a sequence every day, and but there's a lot of moving parts, a ton of moving parts. And as I mentioned, it was all done in sort of real lighting. So there was no additional lights. It was all candlelit. So there was candles to maneuver around, like real candles, fire in a wooden set in a soundstage. So there's that. And so, there was a lot of things for them to consider. And that's what I find. So that's why it's one of my favorite scenes, is because when I now know from the inside out how many things they had to work to make it look reasonable, and then go a step above that and make it look amazing. It's really kind of a huge feat, so yeah, that's what it was. And we just shot it in sequence. And so they had to isolate, of course, some of the stunts, like Rahul's stunt stuff where he was on the floor being pinned by all those guys. That was a whole thing we had to shoot from different angles. And of course, the handing out of the cups and all of the things that sort of occur, Sturge, Matt Bidell dying, all of that stuff had to be isolated and shot sort of individually, but we did go through it in pretty much in sequence. And for the biggest reason is because by the end of the sequence, the church is covered in blood. So we can't really go backwards at that point. We had to do it in order. So it was actually, it was just a lot of fun. And, as I said, a lot of the cast were there, with the exception of Zach, who at that point, unfortunately, is turned to ash, but everybody else was there for most of that sequence. And so it was, offset, we were all like hanging out, and there was a lot of hubbub and playing cards and laughing and snacks and things like that. So it was a lot of fun. It was like a big party for all of us to hang out on set, but it was a lot of work. And I remember I wrapped after that scene, once we finished it, that was my last day. And I remember like leaving, just going like, what just happened? Like, I couldn't wait to see that sequence once they'd added all the things and edited it all together with all the pieces. And when I watched it, finally, I watched it 3 times. I watched it once by myself, and then I watched it twice with my partner, because we were like, I got to watch that whole thing again, because it's so incredible.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can imagine. And that was another scene for me too, like watching it when you know, or you knew that shit was about to hit the fan. Like you're like, okay, like something like big's definitely, coming up. And once you got to the church and everything, I was just like, okay, like there's about to be like a massacre like here. And I just like remember watching it. My jaw was just like on the ground like the whole time. And kind of the way that you're explaining it afterwards, I was just like, what just happened? So
yeah. And when Michael Trucco, who played Wade,
yep,
has this great stunt in that scene where he, you probably remember, where he sort of goes after, shortly after people start waking up.
Yep.
And he goes after this parishioner, and she was a lovely stunt performer. And that stunt, when we first saw it as a cast, because they had rehearsed it a little bit, but we hadn't seen it as a cast.
Yep.
And so they had to go through it, with no one else around, just on the pews on their own. And when we first saw it as a cast, I remember we all went like, what? Like our minds were just, because we knew that sequence, the way that, like, just the severity of which the bodies are being like he's throwing her, and she's so great, the way her reactions are so believable. And it was all very tightly choreographed. But when we first watched that, we knew that like that really does like get your adrenaline going, which is exactly what it does in the show, because that's the first thing that sort of sets off the bloodbath, right? And I know Trucco was really excited to work on that, and he was, when he he was very eager. Do we need to do it again? Should I do it again? We're like, no, I think we got it. I'll do it one more time. He was having such a fun time, and we were having a great time watching him do it. It was so much fun.
That's awesome. Well, I know to kind of like, wrap things up, I don't want to, I know you're very busy, so I don't want to keep it Crystal, but is there anything else you just want to, say to like the fans as far as like the show, and just like where can fans like catch you next, coming up in the future?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the show sort of speaks for itself. It's just such a wild ride, and I'm really proud of the show. And I think we all are. That's the thing that in my communications with the rest of the cast, and in my conversations with them, we're all just so proud of the work that everybody did, from the top, like from the director, producer, all of the crew, right down to the, all of us cast, and all the way down to everyone who took the time and the effort and the energy to be a part of the show. We're just so proud of how it came together, because it really is a huge collaborative team effort to have gotten through that whole pandemic shooting experience with very minimal cases, if any, and never shutting down. Like, I mean, it really took a huge effort on everyone's behalf. But so I'm just excited that people are connecting with it, and I'm excited they're seeing it. And for me, you can see me this fall. I'll be doing a couple episodes of Supergirl, so you can watch me there on the final couple episodes of Supergirl. And then next year you'll be able to catch me in the Midnight Club, which is Mike Flanagan's next upcoming project with Netflix, which I just finished working on this summer. Again, it's going to be a real tremendous wild ride with some great actors and great stories. And there's some other stuff in the works that hopefully next time I can talk to you about.
Yeah, no, definitely. You guys make sure to keep an eye out for those. Again, well, at this point, if you're still watching and you haven't seen the show, I mean, you obviously just don't care about spoilers, but make sure to go watch the show, go watch it again. I got to go do that again myself. Thank you, Crystal, for coming on the show. It was great, talking to you. This is, for me so far for this year, it's definitely like not even just like movies and like film like separately, but it's one of my favorite releases of the year so far. So congratulations to you and the rest of the crew as far as this project.
Thank you so much, and it's really kind of you to say. And I was really had a lot of fun here. Thank you for having me. Hi, my name is Crystal Balint. I play Dolly Scarborough in Netflix's Midnight Mass, and you're watching Pop Culture with Pat.